You ever wake up on a Tuesday morning, coffee in hand, ready to tackle the day, and find a brand new padlock bolted to your own gate? That's exactly what happened to me. Not a lock I put there, not one my family put there. One my neighbor, let's call her Beverly, decided to install because, in her words, the foot traffic was unsightly, on my utility access gate, on a path that runs across my property to the town's emergency water reservoir. Beverly didn't ask me. Beverly didn't knock on my door. Beverly just showed up one morning with a drill and a Home Depot receipt and decided that my land, and by extension, the entire town's fire suppression system, was now under her management. What happened next took 3 months, 2 lawyers, one very confused fire marshal, and a town hall meeting that people in Millhaven are still talking about. What would you have done if you walked out and found a stranger's lock on your gate? Drop a comment, and tell me where in America you're watching from. Let me tell you about Millhaven, Ohio, and about why that gate meant everything to me. Millhaven sits about 40 minutes east of Columbus, small town. The grain elevator is still the tallest thing on the horizon, and everybody knows whose truck is parked outside whose diner on a Sunday morning. It's the kind of place where your last name carries weight, because your family either built something here or they didn't. My family built something here. My grandfather, Ezekiel, bought our farmstead in 1961. 12 acres of Ohio scrubland, a ranch house, a machine shed, and a gravel lane running along the eastern edge of the property. He didn't buy it with a handshake. Handshakes weren't extended to everyone equally back then. He bought it with paperwork, notarized and signed and filed at the county recorder's office, because he understood that in this country, what you own is only as safe as the documents behind it. I inherited the property when my father passed in 2019. I kept it because family isn't just sentiment, it's deed and title. That eastern gravel lane connects Millhaven's main road to the town's auxiliary water reservoir. The fire department uses that reservoir as their primary backup supply every dry summer when hydrant pressure drops. The town has held a formal easement over that lane since 1954, renewed twice, recorded at the county assessor's office. My grandfather helped draft the original agreement. He sat on the town council that year. The gate at the road end of the lane was built by my grandfather in 1967. Galvanized pipe, wooden posts, a simple gravity latch. Never locked. Never needed to be. In August, that lane smells like diesel from the grain trucks and dry Ohio grass. Heat that sits at the back of your throat like chalk dust. The gravel crunches underfoot, loud and brittle. The pipe gate is warm from the afternoon sun. I've walked past it my whole life without thinking twice. Then, Beverly Hutchcraft moved in next door. She arrived in spring of 2022, retiree from suburban Cleveland, freshly divorced, flush with house sale equity, and immediately convinced that Millhaven owed her the peaceful rural life described on a listing as charming rural community. She bought the farmhouse directly adjacent to my eastern fence line, the one with the bay window that looks straight down the right-of-way lane. From that window, she could see my gate. She could see the water authority trucks. And within 6 months, she had decided she didn't like any of it. Her first move was a letter to the county zoning office, not to me, not to the town, claiming the lane was an unregistered access road, creating a safety hazard. The county wrote back politely, explaining the easement was well documented and wishing her a nice day. So she escalated. She parked her car close to the lane entrance, not blocking it, just close enough to make the water authority drivers uncomfortable. She called code enforcement about my machine shed, alleging unpermitted construction on a structure built in 1978 and fully grandfathered. She filed a noise complaint about the sound of gravel under truck tires. Gravel, under tires, on a gravel road. Every complaint went nowhere. But every one cost me time, phone calls, and the slow, grinding frustration of proving, over and over, that my family had been here 60 years and everything was in order. That drip-drip harassment is designed to exhaust you. She was counting on me getting tired. I didn't get tired. I got organized. Then came the morning of September 14th. I walked out to check a fence post and saw it. A brand new padlock. Shiny, heavy, commercial grade, chained through my gate latch. A note was tucked under the chain, handwritten, neat cursive. It said, "For the safety and appearance of the neighborhood, access through this gate is now restricted. Contact B. Hutchcraft for key access. Thank you for your understanding. I stood there in the early morning chill, dew still on the grass, and read that note 3 times. My coffee went cold in my hand. Then I went inside, poured another cup, and started making phone calls. My first call was to Sergeant Walt Creedy at the Millhaven Police Department. Walt had gone to school with my father and had developed, over 30 years of small-town policing, a finely tuned radar for neighbor nonsense versus something real. He drove out within the hour, stood at the gate, looked at the lock the way you look at a parking ticket on a rental car, annoyed but not surprised. He took photos. He took Beverly's note into evidence. Technically, he said, because the lock is on your gate latch and the gate is your property, she trespassed to install it. Possibly vandalism, depending on how you define damage. Can you cut it? I asked. I can document it, he said. You'd need to call the town about the easement. That's civil, not criminal, unless she refuses to remove it after being formally asked. So I called Millhaven Public Works and spoke to Gerald Pruitt, the town's utility coordinator, a tired bureaucrat in his early 60s who processed water meter readings and had never in his career dealt with confrontation. You could hear it in his voice. Gerald, I said, the fire department uses that gate. You understand that? Keyboard sounds. Then, oh, yes, I see that. I'll send a letter. The letter went out 2 days later. Certified mail to Beverly Hutchcraft from the town of Millhaven. The gate served a documented public utility easement. The obstruction violated the 1954 access agreement. The lock must be removed within 10 business days. Beverly's response arrived by personal visit. She showed up at Public Works in a cream-colored blazer with a folder of printed web pages and informed Gerald, loudly enough for the entire office to hear, that the easement was outdated. My gate was a liability hazard, and she'd spoken to a lawyer who told her she had options. What the lawyer had actually told her, it later emerged, was nothing of the sort. She did not remove the lock. So I called Chief Arlene Massey at the Millhaven Volunteer Fire Department, not to demand action, just to inform. Chief Massey had run the department for 11 years. When I said the words locked gate and reservoir access in the same sentence, she went quiet in a way that told me she was already doing the math in her head. When did this happen? She asked. 9 days ago. 3 seconds of silence. Then, I need to come see this. She showed up in her personal truck, not the department vehicle, treating this as serious enough to handle quietly first. She walked the lane with me, wrapped her hand around the chain and pulled. Heavy gauge, commercial grade, locked through a welded ring, added specifically to the latch assembly. She stood up and looked at me with what I'd later describe as controlled fury, wearing a polite face. Our tanker uses this lane during low-pressure events, she said. We've had 2 structure fires in the east section in the last 4 years. If either one had occurred with this gate locked, my driver faces a choice. Cut a commercial chain, 90 seconds minimum, or take an alternate route that adds 4 to 6 minutes. In a residential fire, 4 minutes is the difference between rescue and recovery. She photographed everything. She called the town attorney before she reached her truck. By end of that week, Beverly received a formal legal notice. Violation of Millhaven Municipal Code Section 14-7, obstruction of public utility access. Daily fines of $250 beginning on day 11. The town reserved the right to pursue emergency injunctive relief in county court. Beverly hired a real attorney this time, a property lawyer from Columbus named Strickland. He reviewed everything, billed her for 6 hours, and told her clearly, the easement was ironclad, the lock was illegal, remove it immediately. She did not remove it. Instead, she called a local TV news tip line. She told them a local property owner was being strong-armed by the town, and there was a real story about rural property rights. She gave them my name and address. The tip line passed it to a junior reporter named Travis. He drove out, assessed the situation, and called his editor. "Who put the lock on the gate?" the editor asked. Travis pointed at Beverly's house. "That's your story," the editor said. The segment hadn't aired yet, but in Millhaven, cameras change the atmosphere. They make some people more careful. Beverly was very much the other kind. By week 3, the situation had acquired a weather system logic. Everyone could feel the pressure building. Heavy, inevitable, smelling of something about to break. Beverly's next move was simultaneously petty and creative. She didn't fight the easement head-on. She walked into the county recorder's office and filed a claim of adverse possession interest over the right-of-way lane. Adverse possession is a genuine legal doctrine, old as common law, still active in Ohio. It allows a person to claim ownership of land they've openly, continuously, and exclusively used without the owner's permission for a statutory period. In Ohio, 21 years. Adverse possession requires continuous, hostile, open, exclusive use for 21 years in Ohio. Filing a claim costs almost nothing, but it doesn't create ownership unless a court validates it after a full hearing. Beverly had lived next to my lane for less than 2 years. Her claim was legally worthless. But here's the damage. Filing it put a cloud on my title, a smudge that appears in any title search and can complicate selling, refinancing, or transferring the property without a court formally clearing it. She wasn't going to win. She was going to make me pay to fight. Harassment dressed in legal costume. Cost her about $200 to file. I found out from my cousin Reginald, who works in mortgage lending, and pulled the county records on a hunch. I sat at my kitchen table that evening, the smell of fried chicken still in the air, the ceiling fan doing its slightly off-balance tick overhead, and read the document twice. 60 years of documented ownership, and she filed this with her own hand. I called Miriam Castle the next morning, not a general practitioner, a property rights specialist out of Columbus with 30 years of experience and a reputation for cases with what she called clarity of principle. She grew up in a small Ohio town herself. She understood the situation on the first pass. She's trying to make the title unmarketable, Miriam said. Classic harassment. The good news, it's completely frivolous. The bad news, frivolous filings still cost money to remove. How much? I asked. To file a quiet title action, asking a court to formally declare your clear ownership and strike her claim. $3,000 to $5,000 in legal fees, plus filing costs. The case is simple. It's just the process. $3,000 to $5,000 to defend what my grandfather built. File it, I said. While Miriam began the quiet title action, I did something that became the most consequential act of the entire saga. I went to the Millhaven Public Library on a Saturday and spent the whole afternoon in the local history room with archival binders and microfiche, looking for the original 1954 easement. Not the renewal summaries, the original. The one Ezekiel helped draft. I found it in the third binder. 20 pages of dense legal language, typewriter ink faded to warm gray, smelling of old paper and something musty, like a drawer unopened since the Eisenhower administration. I read every page slowly and photographed each one with my phone. On page 9, in a subsection titled Penalties and Remediation, I found a clause I had never known existed. I read it 3 times, texted Miriam a photo, set my phone on the table. Her response arrived 14 minutes later. One line, "Call me now." I called. She answered on the first ring. The conversation lasted 45 minutes and changed the shape of everything that came after. But before I tell you what was on that page, timing matters in a story like this. You need to know what Beverly was doing in those same weeks, because she was not idle. She launched a neighborhood campaign, went door to door with a printed one-page flyer, raising concerns about unmonitored vehicle access, potential insurance liability, and, notice this phrase, the character of the neighborhood. No explicitly discriminatory language. It didn't need any. In a town like Millhaven, the subtext carries its own weight. Most of my neighbors, people who had known my family across 2 and 3 generations, took the flyer, said, and called me with screenshots. Several started keeping written logs of her behavior unprompted. And my neighbor Paulette, while dropping off a pan of cornbread, mentioned casually that her video doorbell faced directly down the lane. "Recording and everything," she said. "Just thought you should know it's there." I thanked her. Filed that away like a receipt for something I planned to return in due time. By week 5, Beverly had concluded that certified letters and neighborhood flyers were too slow. So she called a fence company, not to replace a section of her existing fence, to extend it, running a new line from her eastern property boundary across the entrance of my right-of-way lane, connecting to a post she planned to set at the edge of the public right-of-way. In plain language, she wanted to wall off the lane from the main road entirely. Permanent. Done. Hargrove Fencing sent a crew out on a Wednesday morning. The crew lead, Dale, had been doing this 20 years and had a contractor's instinct for when something wasn't right. He started marking post positions with spray paint. I saw the truck from my kitchen window. I put down my coffee, laced up my boots, and walked out to the property line. "Morning," I said. "Morning. You have permits for that run?" Dale checked his paperwork. The permit listed Beverly's address, but the fence extension, as staked, crossed into the public right-of-way, land that was not hers to fence. "You're going to want to call your client," I said, "and tell her she doesn't own what she thinks she owns." Dale called Beverly. Brief, terse conversation. He told me they'd need to verify property lines before proceeding. The crew packed up and left. They did not come back. Beverly tried to amend the fence permit the next day, expanding the permitted area to include the right-of-way. The permit clerk, sharp-eyed Deborah, 22 years in county administration, had already received the town attorney's internal notices about the easement dispute. She put the application on administrative hold, pending an official survey. The survey came back confirming what everyone already knew. The extension was denied. At this point, Beverly had begun what Strickland would later describe diplomatically as acting without adequate consultation. She filed a complaint with the Ohio Civil Rights Commission, alleging selective enforcement against her as a recent transplant and single woman. She gave a 45-minute interview to the Licking County Advocate, describing my property as a persistent blight that depresses surrounding property values. The Advocate ran it at 6 paragraphs. At the bottom, a comment from the Millhaven town attorney confirming the active enforcement action and 19 days of accrued fines at $250 per day, $4,750 and still running. While Beverly was generating press coverage that consistently made her look worse, I was quietly building on 3 institutional fronts. First, I filed a formal written complaint with the Ohio Environmental Protection Agency, noting that sustained interference with emergency municipal water access carried public health implications under state code. The EPA's regional office logged it with a case number, a government document on record. That carries institutional weight that a neighbor's phone call simply cannot. Second, I contacted the Ohio Insurance Institute, which monitors property disputes affecting municipal liability profiles. Their involvement meant Millhaven's insurer became aware of the situation. Insurers communicate urgency to municipalities in a language those municipalities understand very clearly. Escalating to state agencies, EPA, state fire marshal, insurance bodies, creates official records with institutional weight that individual complaints cannot match. File early, not late. Third, I reached out to the Ohio Farm Bureau's Legal Assistance Program for rural property owners facing easement disputes. My situation qualified. They assigned a paralegal to monitor and be available for any public proceedings. Each step was public record, legitimate, and entirely within my rights. None involved Beverly directly. All of them were arrows pointing at the same target. October 3rd, the town's water district budget meeting, open to the public, covered by local press, 6 weeks away. I spent those 6 weeks building something more durable and more publicly visible than anything a Facebook post or a Home Depot padlock could touch. Here is what was on page 9 of the 1954 easement agreement, in the subsection titled Penalties and Remediation. In the event of any obstruction of the easement access route, whether physical, legal, or administrative, the responsible party shall be liable for a lump sum compensatory payment to the property owner, equal to the assessed value of 1 acre of land within the county at the time of the obstruction, multiplied by the number of calendar days of unresolved obstruction, calculated from the date of first written notice by the municipality. Sit with that for a moment. The assessed value of 1 acre in Licking County, Ohio, as of 2022, approximately $8,200. Beverly received the town's formal written notice on September 19th. When Miriam and I discussed this clause in early October, the obstruction had been unresolved for 31 days since that notice. $8,200 multiplied by 31 days, $254,200. On top of the $250 per day municipal fines accruing separately, Miriam, 30 years of property law, rarely surprised by anything, went quiet for a full 10 seconds on the phone. Then, This clause was written to be punitive, designed specifically to make interference with this water access so financially catastrophic that no one would seriously consider attempting it. Whoever drafted this in 1954 had fire season on their mind and very strong feelings about it. My grandfather was on the town council in 1954, I said. A pause. Then, with something close to admiration, of course he was. Ezekiel Okafor had built a trap, not out of malice but out of foresight. He understood that an easement protecting a community's water supply needed financial teeth, not just words. He wrote those teeth into law 70 years before anyone needed them, buried on page 9, where only someone who read the whole document would ever find them. I read the whole document. Takeaway. When reviewing any property easement, especially older ones, read every page, including penalty and remediation clauses. Dormant financial provisions in old easements can carry far more power than current municipal fine schedules. The clause had never been invoked, not once in 70 years, because no one had ever been reckless enough to lock that gate. It had waited, patient as a smoke detector, present, ready, for exactly this level of foolishness. Miriam proposed a parallel civil action invoking the clause alongside the quiet title case. If successful, the judgment would cover every dollar of legal fees and the entire 3-month ordeal, with significant surplus. She'll settle the moment Strickland sees this, Miriam said. I don't want a quiet settlement, I said. Explain. I want this at the town meeting, October 3rd, in public, on the record, with the fire chief and the press and every neighbor who got one of her flyers in that room. I want Millhaven to see what was done here, and to hear, out loud, that 70 years of community protection was not going to end because one person bought a padlock at Home Depot. Miriam was quiet a moment. Then, that is not the most financially efficient strategy, but it is the right one. October 3rd. We hold everything until then. We don't just hold, I said. We build. The 6 weeks between that phone call and October 3rd were the quietest and most productive of the entire affair. I worked mornings in the machine shed. Motor oil and cold metal, the weight of a wrench handle before the day warmed up, and spent evenings at the kitchen table with legal pads and Miriam's voice on speakerphone, building a case the way you build a fence, post by post, crossbar by crossbar, nothing fancy, nothing unnecessary, everything load-bearing. The physical evidence layer came together first. Paulette's doorbell camera contained 3 things I hadn't fully known about. Beverly's car blocking the lane entrance on 3 documented occasions, the Hargrove fencing crew arriving and leaving, and, the piece I hadn't expected, the complete footage of the September 14th lock installation. Time-stamped 7:22 a.m. Clear as day, Beverly Hutchcraft, her own drill, her own chain, installing a lock on my gate. She had never checked whether a camera was there. She'd apparently never thought to look. Miriam had the footage subpoenaed and entered into evidence for both the civil case and the town's enforcement action. The legal layer was built in parallel. The quiet title action was moving through Licking County Common Pleas Court. Ohio has a streamlined process for obviously unfounded adverse possession claims. When a claimant cannot show 21 years of continuous, hostile, open use, a court can grant summary judgment without a full trial. Beverly had been in Millhaven less than 2 years. This was not going to be a long fight, but it needed to be done correctly. Takeaway. A quiet title action asks a court to formally declare who holds clear legal ownership, clearing fraudulent or competing claims from the public record. Each state has its own process. Look up your state's quiet title statute before you need it. Miriam also drafted the full civil complaint, invoking the 1954 penalty clause. 48 pages with exhibits, meticulously sourced, but held it unfiled. The plan? Serve it on Beverly at 7 a.m. on October 3rd, so she and Strickland received it simultaneously with the public confrontation. 2 forms of pressure, arriving from 2 directions at the same moment. The financial layer was something Reginald helped me understand. As the $250 per day municipal fines accrued, Millhaven had authority to file a property lien against Beverly's home for the unpaid balance. A municipal lien attaches to the property title itself, not to Beverly personally, but to the land. If she tried to sell, the lien surfaces in the title search, and closing cannot proceed until it's satisfied. Same for refinancing. The debt follows the land wherever it goes. Takeaway. Municipalities can file property liens for unpaid code enforcement fines. The lien attaches to the title, blocking any sale or refinancing, and survives even if the property changes hands. The town attorney agreed to accelerate the lien filing. It was recorded at the county recorder's office on September 28th. No announcement, no press release. Beverly discovered it only when a refinance inquiry to her bank triggered a title search that came back flagged. The community layer was the least dramatic and perhaps the most important. I simply talked to people. I went to the diner on weekday mornings. I spoke briefly at my church. I sat with the head of the Millhaven Historical Society, a retired school teacher named Harriet who had spent 15 years preserving local records, and told her about Ezekiel's role in the 1954 easement. She said, "We have his photograph from the 1956 council meeting. Would you like it in the display?" Yes, I would. Chief Massey needed no persuading. She agreed to appear at the town meeting in her official capacity and speak to the public safety record directly. Travis, the TV reporter, confirmed his full crew for October 3rd. After I told him, off the record, it would be worth attending. By the evening of October 2nd, everything was positioned. The civil complaint was at the process server, ready for 7 a.m. delivery. The lien was recorded. Miriam was prepared. Chief Massey had her notes. Harriet had her display. Paulette had her USB drive. I drove out to the gate that evening. 53 days of defiance, $13,250 in municipal fines, and $434,600 accumulating under a clause Beverly still didn't know existed. I stood at the gate in the October dusk, the air smelling of dead leaves and cooling soil. The pipe was cold under my palm. I thought about Ezekiel standing at this same gate in a different season, having built the fence, hung the latch, written the clause that was now, 70 years later, about to do exactly what he intended. Then I drove home, set my alarm for 5, and slept without any trouble at all. Beverly had not been idle during those 6 weeks. She sensed pressure building from multiple directions. The accruing fines, the lien she'd discovered when a refinance attempt surfaced a flagged title, the quiet title action working through court, and she responded the way people with poor judgment and reliable internet access do when they feel cornered. She went loud. She created a Facebook group called Millhaven Property Rights Alliance. She posted several times a day, photographs of my property taken from over her fence line, screenshots of code enforcement notices she characterized as harassment, long, earnest posts about small-town Ohio being under siege from bureaucratic overreach targeting regular citizens. The group attracted 43 members in its first week. 31 were people from outside Millhaven who had strong opinions about everything and no actual knowledge of the situation. 5 were Millhaven residents who joined out of curiosity and immediately texted me screenshots. The remaining 7 I could not fully account for, though at least 2 appeared to be the same person, using different profile names. None of this changed anything legally, but Miriam noted every post in her files. Then Beverly called my employer. I worked 3 days a week as an equipment advisor for an agricultural cooperative about 12 miles out. She called the main office and left a voicemail for my supervisor, Clive, making vague allusions to concerns about Mr. Okafor's professionalism and suggesting the cooperative might want to be aware of his ongoing disputes with community members. Clive listened to it twice, printed the transcript, pinned it to the break room corkboard under a handwritten header that said, Exhibit A, then texted me a photo with one word. Seriously? She called me, Clive said the next morning, with the expression of a man who had received a very strange piece of mail. I'm genuinely not sure what she expected me to do with that. Neither am I said. Her most consequential gambit, and ultimately her most self-defeating, was political. She identified the 2 most recently elected town council members, newest to local politics and most susceptible to sustained constituent pressure, and approached them individually. She suggested the enforcement action had become disproportionate and proposed the fines be suspended in exchange for a managed access solution. Her proposal: she would install a call box on the gate. Emergency vehicles could activate it to request entry. She personally guaranteed a response and gate opening within 15 minutes of any request. 15 minutes. For a fire truck trying to reach a burning house. Chief Massey received a copy through the town attorney's office. She read it once. Then she wrote a formal 4-page response on department letterhead to the full council, explaining precisely what a 15-minute access delay meant for a residential structure fire. She included survival probability statistics at various stages of fire development. She included ISO public protection classification data, the rating system that determines homeowners' insurance premiums across an entire fire district. Takeaway: ISO fire ratings directly affect every homeowner's insurance premium in a fire district. If a fire department's water access is compromised and the ISO rating drops, every homeowner in the district can face higher premiums, not just the owner in the dispute. She concluded with one sentence the council chair later told me he read aloud to himself twice. A 15-minute response guarantee for a locked gate during an active structure fire is not a solution. It is a liability. The 2 council members who had received Beverly's written proposal very quickly became council members who had never received it. No response was sent. The proposal was not discussed at any subsequent meeting. In the final week before October 3rd, Beverly called me directly for the first and only time. Her voice was composed. She had clearly prepared what she wanted to say. She offered a private settlement. She would remove the lock voluntarily, without any admission of wrongdoing, in exchange for a written agreement that I would appropriately maintain the visual appearance of the lane and install landscaping screening at the gate entrance to minimize visual impact on adjacent properties. She wanted shrubbery. In exchange for unlocking a gate she had no right to lock. I let her finish. Then I said, "I appreciate you calling, Beverly. My attorney will be in touch." Hung up. Texted Miriam. She called, offered landscaping. She's scared. Miriam's reply came back in under a minute. "Good. 3 days. Hold the line." The town meeting was 72 hours away. The civil complaint was sealed at the process server's office, scheduled for 7 a.m. delivery on October 3rd. The lock was still on my gate. The clause meter was still running. By morning of October 3rd, the total civil liability, 53 days at $8,200 per day, had reached $434,600. Beverly Hutchcraft still had no idea that number existed. October 3rd, 2022, a Tuesday. I was up before the sun. The air outside smelled the way Ohio always smells in early October. Wood smoke from somewhere down the road. Wet soil cooling after a dry week. Something sweet and faintly fermented, drifting over from cornfields where the stalks had been cut and left to break down. I made a full pot of coffee. I stood at the kitchen window and watched the gate at the end of the lane. The padlock caught what little light there was and threw it back. For the last time, I thought, for the last time, that lock is on my gate. At 7 in the morning, a process server from a Columbus firm drove to Beverly's property and rang her front bell. When she answered, apparently in her bathrobe per his later account, he handed her a manila envelope and collected her signature on the delivery confirmation. Inside, Miriam's civil complaint, invoking the 1954 easement penalty clause, filed at 6:47 that morning in Licking County Common Pleas Court, 48 pages. Exhibits including the complete 1954 original, the county notice records, a day-by-day accounting of the accruing liability, and the demand, $434,600 in compensatory damages, plus attorney fees, court costs, and interest from the date of first notice. Beverly called Strickland at 7:09 a.m. Strickland had his associate pull the 1954 document within 15 minutes. The associate read the penalty clause, called Strickland back. Their conversation lasted 6 minutes. Then Strickland called Beverly. Their conversation lasted 11 minutes. I don't know exactly what Strickland said. What I know is that at 8:23 a.m., he called Miriam's office and asked, in the carefully modulated language of an attorney who has just understood the full dimensions of a problem, whether there was any possibility of scheduling a pre-hearing conference to explore resolution of the pending matters. Miriam told him she'd be available after 7 p.m. She had a town meeting to attend first. By 6:15 p.m., I was at the Millhaven Municipal Building, the converted 1940s post office with the original terrazzo floor, cool and hard and patterned in brown and cream geometric, that had survived 8 decades of Ohio winters. I helped Harriet carry in her display boards, enlarged photographs, a laminated copy of the 1954 easement's first page, with the penalty clause highlighted in yellow, and the framed photograph of my grandfather at the 1956 town council meeting, looking directly at the camera with an expression I had always read as patience, but now understood as something closer to determination. By 6:30 p.m., the room held more people than the chairs could. By 6:45, latecomers were standing 3 deep along the walls. The Millhaven Water District budget meeting had not drawn a crowd like this in anyone's memory. People stopped at Harriet's table on their way to their seats. More than a few stood there longer than I expected, looking at my grandfather's photograph. Chief Massey was in the front row in her full dress uniform, the dark jacket, rank insignia, service pins. Not her daily gear. A deliberate choice that communicated everything about how seriously she was taking tonight. Travis had his crew in the back corner. The camera's red recording light glowed steadily. His producer was with him. The segment had been elevated above the junior reporter tier. Miriam sat beside me, leather portfolio on her knee, expression set to the specific kind of calm that experienced attorneys use when they already know exactly how a proceeding is going to go. Beverly arrived at 6:48, dressed well, composed, her familiar folder on her lap. She chose a seat in the 3rd row, angled away from where I was sitting. She did not look at me. She held that folder with both hands, her knuckles carrying a faint whiteness that told me Strickland's morning call had landed as intended. Council Chair Bernard White called the session to order at exactly 7. He read the 2 agenda items, the Water District budget and utility easement enforcement, Okafor property. Then he looked out at the packed room. "I see we have a very full house tonight," he said. "We'll work through the budget first and then move to item 2. A pause. "I suspect that's what most of you came for." A murmur ran through the room. A few quiet laughs. Beverly looked down at her folder. The budget took 22 minutes. The fastest that particular item had been resolved in Bernard White's 16 years running Millhaven's meetings. Then he called item 2. Town Attorney Sandra Fitch went first. 4 clean minutes, no drama. Lock appeared September 14th. Written notice September 19th. Daily fines of $250 began on day 11. Outstanding balance as of tonight, $13,250. Property lien filed September 28th. Town prepared to pursue full collection in county court. She did not mention the 1954 clause. That moment belonged to me. Chief Massey stood next. No notes. "I want to be clear about what this gate is," she said. Her voice was even and unhurried, and took up every cubic foot of air in that room. "It is not a property boundary marker. It is a fire department access point. Our tanker uses that lane as its primary route to the auxiliary reservoir during low-pressure events, which happen every dry summer in this part of Ohio. We have had 2 structure fires in Millhaven's east section in the last 4 years. The room was very still. If either of those fires had occurred with this gate locked, my driver faces a choice. Cut a commercial-grade chain, 90 seconds minimum, or take an alternate route adding 4 to 6 minutes to our response. In a residential structure fire, 4 minutes is not a delay. It is the difference between a rescue and a recovery, between someone walking out of their house and someone not walking out. She let that sit for 3 full seconds. Every person in this room who owns a home in Millhaven's East Fire District should understand. This has not been Darnell Okafor's problem alone. It has been yours. Because if your house is the one burning while my driver is cutting that chain, there is nothing I can say to you afterward that makes that better. She sat down. The room was quiet for a moment that felt longer than it was. Bernard opened the floor. A retired contractor named Virgil described the lane as a part of the neighborhood his whole life, never caused anyone a problem until recently. A woman named Donna said she hadn't understood what the lane was for until tonight, and would be calling her insurance agent in the morning. Then Paulette stood up, calmly described watching the lock installation on her doorbell camera, and walked to the front of the room to place a USB drive on Sandra Fitch's table with the unhurried air of someone who had been waiting a long time to do exactly this. Bernard said, "Ms. Hutchcraft, you are named in this enforcement action. Would you like to speak?" Beverly stood, delivered her prepared remarks, property rights, individual liberty, the town's disproportionate response, her desire for collaboration. She used the word collaborative 4 times. She was articulate. She was also standing in a room of 94 people who had just heard Chief Massey talk about recoveries instead of rescues, and she was badly, fatally miscalibrating the temperature of that room. When she finished, I stood up. One sheet of paper. I didn't use the podium. I spoke from the second row, clearly enough for the back wall to hear. My grandfather, Ezekiel Okafor, helped draft this easement agreement in 1954, I said. He sat on this town council. He believed that Millhaven's water access was a community obligation, not a feature, not a negotiable convenience, an obligation. And he built consequences into the law to make sure that belief had real teeth. I want to read one paragraph from page 9 of that document. I read the penalty clause, slowly. The whole room heard the number, $8,200 per day. I let it land. As of this morning, my attorney filed suit in Licking County Common Pleas Court, invoking this clause. The accrued total, from the date of first written notice on September 19th through today, $434,600. The documentation is complete. 2 independent property attorneys have verified the clause as valid and enforceable. I looked at Beverly. She had gone very still. The folder on her lap was no longer moving. I am not here tonight for that money, I said. I am here because Millhaven has protected this water access for 70 years, through my grandfather's work and through every council member who renewed that easement since 1954. And I wanted on the public record that one person with a Home Depot padlock was not going to end that. I want every person in this room who received her flyers to hear that out loud, from me, in this building. I sat down. The room erupted. Bernard called for order twice. It took nearly a minute for things to settle. When they did, he turned to Beverly. Ms. Hutchcraft, are you prepared to voluntarily remove the lock and chain from the Okafor gate by 9 o'clock tomorrow morning? Or shall the town proceed with its full enforcement action in county court? Strickland leaned left. Beverly leaned right, a whispered exchange lasting no more than 15 seconds. Then Beverly Hutchcraft stood and said, in a voice that had gone completely flat, I will remove it by 9 a.m. At 9:04 the following morning, I stood in the lane and watched her walk to my gate with bolt cutters. She cut the chain, removed the padlock, carried both pieces to her car and placed them in the trunk without a word. She got in. She drove away. The gate swung open on its own gravity latch, the way it had for 55 years before she arrived. The lane was clear. The morning air smelled like October and diesel, and something I had not felt in 3 months, the uncomplicated quiet of a thing being right again. I took out my phone and called Chief Massey. It's open, I said. Good, she said quietly. Thank you, Darnell. Thank my grandfather, I said. He wrote the clause. In the weeks after the town meeting, things moved with the efficiency that comes when everyone involved reaches the same conclusion. Let's be done with this. The civil case settled out of court within 3 weeks. Beverly paid the full $13,250 in outstanding municipal fines, satisfied the property lien in full, and made a cash payment to me, the amount of which I cannot publicly disclose per the agreement. Miriam described it as more than adequate for the disruption caused. Strickland's firm issued a statement saying their client has acknowledged the resolution of this matter and considers it closed. The quiet title action was resolved 3 weeks after that by summary judgment. The judge's written order used the word frivolous twice in reference to the adverse possession claim. Beverly's filing was struck from the county records. My title was declared clear and unencumbered, properly, legally, permanently clear. The smudge was gone. Beverly listed her property for sale the first week of November. She accepted an offer in January and was gone from Millhaven by February. The Millhaven Town Council voted unanimously at their November meeting to commission a professional resurvey and complete re-recording of the 1954 easement, updated to current Ohio legal standards, GPS-certified boundary markers, digital filing cross-referenced in the county's GIS database. Anyone pulling a title search on any adjacent property would now see the easement clearly and immediately. My grandfather's work, made permanent in a format the next 70 years could actually use. They also passed what has been called, informally, the Millhaven Gate Ordinance. Any recorded utility access easement within town limits must have its access point marked with a regulation reflective sign, and any physical obstruction activates an immediate emergency court order rather than the standard 10-day code enforcement timeline. passed 5-0. The fastest unanimous vote Bernard White had seen in 16 years. Chief Massey submitted a grant application to the Ohio State Fire Marshal's office for a new tanker, an upgrade the department had needed for 3 years but couldn't fund. In the demonstrated community needs section, she described exactly what had happened at my gate and what it illustrated about water access vulnerability in small rural municipalities. The grant was approved in the spring. The new tanker arrived in June. Harriet from the Historical Society turned the display she'd built for the town meeting into a permanent exhibit at the Millhaven Public Library. My grandfather's photograph is framed at eye level. I went to see it on a quiet Thursday afternoon. I stood in front of it for a while without saying anything in particular. That was enough. The Ezekiel Okafor Community Fund was established through the Licking County Community Foundation in December, funded in part by the settlement proceeds. Annual scholarships for Millhaven area high school seniors pursuing degrees in law, civil engineering, environmental science, or public administration. The first 3 awards went to 3 kids from Millhaven, heading to Ohio State, Columbus State, and Ohio University. Each received a check and a card explaining, briefly, who Ezekiel Okafor was and what he believed. That a community's infrastructure is a shared obligation, and the people who protect it deserve to be remembered. I had a new sign made for the gate, aluminum, reflective, regulation-sized. Millhaven Utility Access Easement, established 1954. Unobstructed access required by law. The gate latch is unlocked. The lane is clear. It has been clear every day since October 4th, 2022, and I intend to keep it that way.
So that's how it ended. Not with a courtroom drama, not with Renata in handcuff, just a woman in a charcoal blazer picking up her folder and working out the room she's controlled for 9 years. $118,000 of voice easement, 5 stumps with new trees going in where the old ones stood. Here's what I keep coming back to. Garrett didn't win because he was louder. He didn't win by reacting. He won by waiting and by reading a document that has been sitting in a lockbox for 60 years. 20 years was in a 1961 deed. That's what the whole thing came down to. Renata has spent 20 years learning how to use sedum against people. She just never counted on someone who done the same homework she had. That's the thing about petty power. It depends on the gap between what they know and what you don't. The moment that gap closes, the whole thing collapses. Motorboat has something sitting in a drawer somewhere. A deed, a list, a contract we signed and never finished reading. Maybe it never mattered. But if someone show up at 6 in the morning with a chainsaw and a lanyard, you want to know what is that document before they do. If an HOA has ever come after your property, your wallet, your peace of mind, tell me about it in the comments. I read every single one. Subscribe if you are new here. Every story in the channel is real. And remember, the most dangerous thing you can do to someone who abuses power is simply know your rights. See you next time.